Commander Vex 9 clicked his 6 claws against the metal desk, creating a rhythm that somehow managed to sound both bored and irritated. The Galactic Defense Academy's surveillance room buzzed with the usual collection of creatures from across 17 different star systems, all pretending to pay attention to the morning briefing. Well, morning for those who actually had a sun that rose and set in a predictable pattern. Cadets, Vex 9's voice crackled through his translator unit, which had been acting up ever since that unfortunate incident with the plasma conduit last week. Today marks your final combat assessment. As you know, failure means immediate expulsion from the Academy and a one-way ticket back to whatever backwater planet spawned you. A nervous ripple passed through the assembled crowd. Krix, a purple-scaled Centaurian, shifted uncomfortably in his specialized chair. His species had evolved from what humans would recognize as giant lizards, though mentioning that comparison usually resulted in someone getting their face melted by acid spit. The scenario is simple, Vex 9 continued, his tone suggesting it was anything but simple. Single combat against a Class 7 battle drone. Duration, 15 minutes. Objective, survive. He paused for dramatic effect, though his species lacked facial expressions, so it mostly just looked like he was having technical difficulties. Oh, and try not to embarrass your entire homeworld in the process. We stream these assessments to recruitment offices across the galaxy. From the back row, a small figure raised what appeared to be a hand, though it was difficult to tell since humans were notoriously hard to identify under their standard-issue environmental suits. Yes, Cadet, Vex 9 squinted at his datapad, Marcus Webb. Sir, when you say survive, do you mean just not die or actually complete some kind of objective? The voice came through the universal translator with that peculiar flat quality that marked it as human speech. Several aliens turned to stare. Humans were relatively new to the galactic community, having been discovered only 3 cycles ago when they somehow managed to accidentally blow up one of their own space stations while testing what they called experimental rocket fuel. The fact that they considered controlled explosions a form of propulsion had immediately marked them as either brilliant or insane. The jury was still out. Cadet Webb, Vex 9 replied with what might have been amusement if his species possessed the biological capability for it. Survival is the objective. The battle drones are programmed to kill. Your job is to not let them. Right, got it. Don't die. Simple enough. Webb settled back in his seat with what sounded suspiciously like satisfaction. Krix leaned over to the cadet next to him, a methane-breathing Gazian named Blorp, whose name sounded exactly like what you'd expect from a creature that communicated through controlled burps. Is it just me? Krix whispered, his forked tongue flicking nervously, or do humans seem overly casual about death? Blorp's response was a series of small pops and hisses that roughly translated to, have you read their psychological profiles? They consider extreme sports a form of entertainment. Their entire species is mentally unstable. The truth was, most of the Academy's alien instructors had stopped trying to understand human psychology after reviewing Earth's history. Any species that invented something called reality television was clearly beyond conventional analysis. First up, Vex 9 announced, consulting his list, Cadet Thyron of the Stellar Imperium. A massive 8-foot-tall figure rose from the front row. Thyron belonged to a warrior race that had conquered 12 star systems before joining the galactic community. His people were bred for combat with natural armor plating and reflexes that could track a plasma bolt in flight. If anyone was going to survive this assessment, it would be him. The combat chamber was a circular arena surrounded by reinforced transparent aluminum barriers. The energy shields hummed to life as Thyron entered, his ceremonial battle claws gleaming under the harsh lighting. The Academy spared no expense on these assessments, partly for training purposes and partly because alien betting pools generated significant revenue. The battle drone descended from the ceiling like a mechanical spider having a very bad day. Class 7 units were originally designed for suppressing prison riots on maximum security planets. They stood 9 feet tall, possessed enough firepower to level a small building, and had reaction times measured in microseconds. In other words, they were specifically built to turn organic life forms into component atoms. "Begin assessment," Vex 9 announced. What followed could generously be described as a fight, though systematic dismantling of a living creature by an emotionless killing machine might have been more accurate. Thyron lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds before the medical team had to activate the emergency teleporter to prevent him from becoming a very large, very colorful stain on the arena floor. Well, Vex 9 observed as Thyron was rushed to the medical bay, that was educational. The next 3 cadets fared similarly. Zara, a crystalline-based life form from the mineral worlds, shattered spectacularly after 90 seconds. Gorth, whose species could naturally generate electromagnetic pulses, managed to briefly disable the drone's shields before being systematically reduced to his component molecules. The squid-like tentacore known as Squishface McGillicuddy, whose actual name was unpronounceable by most species, it lasted longer than expected by using his natural camouflage abilities, but even that only bought him 6 minutes. "This is getting depressing," muttered Instructor Zara Prime, a floating energy being who served as the Academy's combat specialist. "At this rate, we'll need to lower the difficulty settings again." "Cannot," Vex 9 replied. "Galactic Defense Force regulations specify minimum standards. Besides, these cadets need to learn that real combat situations do not come with difficulty adjustments." As the 5th cadet was carried away on a medical stretcher, an uncomfortable silence settled over the observation deck. The remaining students shifted nervously, calculating their odds of survival and finding the mathematics distinctly unfavorable. Cadet Marcus Webb, report for assessment. The small human figure stood up with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. While other species had evolved sophisticated survival instincts that screamed warnings when faced with mortal danger, humans appeared to have replaced that particular evolutionary trait with curiosity and an inexplicable desire to poke dangerous things with sticks. Webb entered the arena with a casual stride that suggested he was heading to lunch rather than potentially violent death. The other cadets pressed against the observation windows, morbidly fascinated. Humans were notorious for their unpredictability, but most bets were on whether he'd last 30 seconds or a full minute. "Any final words, Cadet Webb?" Vex 9 inquired, though his species considered last statements a pointless custom. "Yeah," Webb replied, adjusting his environmental suit's helmet. "Quick question about the rules. Are there any?" "Rules?" Vex 9's confusion was evident even through his mechanical translator. "This is combat assessment, not recreational activity." "So, anything goes? No restrictions on tactics or equipment usage?" "The only rule is survival, Cadet. Use whatever methods you deem necessary." Webb nodded thoughtfully. "Perfect. One more thing, how attached are you to this particular drone?" Before Vex 9 could process the question, the battle drone activated. Its sensors locked onto the human's position, weapon systems coming online with a sound like angry electricity, having an argument with physics. What happened next would be analyzed, debated and argued about in military academies across the galaxy for the next 50 years. Webb didn't run. He didn't dodge. He didn't even seem particularly concerned as several tons of highly advanced killing machine began its systematic approach. Instead, he reached into his equipment pack and pulled out what appeared to be a small, innocuous cylinder. "Is that?" Crick squinted through the observation window. "Is that a standard-issue emergency beacon?" "Emergency beacons are for signaling distress situations," Blorp burped in confusion. "They have no combat applications." Webb held the device up like he was examining a particularly interesting insect. The drone closed to within 50 meters, its weapon systems charging with ominous efficiency. "Computer," Webb called out conversationally, "analyze current target for structural weaknesses." His suit's AI responded in the cheerfully helpful tone that made most aliens question human judgment. "Scanning. Structural analysis complete." Primary weakness identified in power coupling junction, located approximately 2 meters above ground level, protected by standard deflector shields. Excellent. Now, what would happen if someone were to introduce a focused electromagnetic pulse directly into that junction? Catastrophic system failure would result in approximately 0.03 seconds. And how much electromagnetic energy does a standard emergency beacon generate when it catastrophically overloads? Warning: emergency beacon overload will result in significant electromagnetic pulse. This action is highly dangerous and not recommended. Webb grinned, though the expression was hidden behind his helmet. Computer, disable safety protocols on emergency beacon. Authorization Webb Alpha 77. Safety protocols disabled. Warning: this action will void your equipment warranty. The drone was now within 30 meters and closing fast. Its targeting system had achieved a lock, and energy crackled along its primary weapon array. In the observation deck, several cadets had closed their eyes or turned away, unable to watch what was about to happen. Webb calmly activated the emergency beacon's overload sequence and tossed it directly at the drone's center mass. What followed was less an explosion and more like reality briefly forgetting how electricity was supposed to behave. The electromagnetic pulse turned the drone's sophisticated targeting systems into expensive paperweights, its weapon arrays into decorative sculptures, and its motor functions into abstract art. The massive machine toppled forward, crashed to the arena floor, and proceeded to do absolutely nothing except emit small puffs of smoke from various joints and sensors. Webb walked over to the disabled drone, knocked on its hull with his knuckles, and looked up at the observation deck. So he called out cheerfully, "Do I pass?" The silence in the observation room was so complete that you could have heard a pin drop, assuming pins made sounds when they dropped in the vacuum of space, which they didn't. But the metaphor remained valid. Vex 9 stared at his instruments, which confirmed that yes, the battle drone was completely offline, and yes, the human cadet was standing next to it, looking remarkably pleased with himself. That Instructor Zara Prime finally managed to say was not how this assessment was supposed to proceed. Technically, Webb's voice echoed from the arena. You said survival was the only objective. You didn't specify that the drone had to remain functional. Crix's jaw dropped open, revealing his species' impressive collection of sharp teeth. He disabled a Class 7 battle drone with an emergency beacon. Humans, burped in what might have been admiration or horror, are fundamentally broken as a species. Vex 9 was frantically checking Academy regulations, his claws clicking rapidly across his data interface. There is no specific prohibition against disabling the combat assessment equipment, he muttered. The rules state that cadets must survive for 15 minutes against a battle drone. They do not specify that the drone must remain operational. So he passes? Asked another instructor. Technically, yes. Webb, meanwhile, had climbed onto the disabled drone and was examining its internal components with the sort of casual interest that most people reserved for checking their mail. Hey, this is actually pretty sophisticated engineering. Mind if I take a look at the power coupling design? I've got some ideas for improvements. Improvements? Vex 9's voice cracked slightly. Sure, the electromagnetic shielding is decent, but there's a really obvious vulnerability in the junction design. Any first-year engineering student could exploit it. Well, assuming they were willing to potentially blow themselves up in the process. Several instructors exchanged meaningful glances. The human cadet had just identified the exact weakness that military engineers had spent months trying to address in the battle drone's design. Cadet Webb, Vex 9 called down, "Please report to the briefing room immediately." "Am I in trouble?" Webb asked, sliding down from the drone with practiced ease. "That," replied Vex 9, "remains to be determined." As Webb exited the arena, the remaining cadets burst into excited chatter. The human had done something unprecedented, not only survived the assessment, but completely neutralized the threat using equipment that wasn't even designed for combat. "This changes everything," whispered Thyron, who had returned from the medical bay with several new scars and a significantly humbler attitude. "If a human can defeat a battle drone—" "Then maybe," Crix finished thoughtfully, "we've been approaching this all wrong." In the briefing room, a collection of senior instructors had gathered to review the footage of Webb's assessment. The holographic display showed the encounter from multiple angles, and each viewing revealed new details that made the accomplishment seem even more impossible. "Run it again," requested Admiral Corex, the Academy's commandant. His species resembled what humans would call a cross between a shark and a very irritated accountant. The footage replayed, showing Webb's casual analysis, his calm conversation with his suit's computer, and the precisely timed throw that had neutralized millions of credits worth of military hardware. "Reaction time?" Corex asked. 3.7 seconds from target lock to countermeasure deployment, reported the technical analyst. "Well within human normal parameters." "Stress indicators?" "Minimal. Heart rate elevated but stable. No signs of panic or fear response." Corex's gills fluttered in what his species used instead of sighing. "So he wasn't lucky. This was calculated." "Appears so, sir." The door chimed and Webb entered, his environmental suit helmet tucked under his arm. His hair was slightly mussed, and he looked like someone who had just finished a particularly enjoyable puzzle rather than a life-or-death combat situation. "You wanted to see me, sir?" "Cadet Webb," Corex began, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Explain your actions in the combat assessment." Webb blinked. "Which part? The surviving or the not dying?" "The part where you destroyed Academy property valued at approximately 4 million galactic credits." "Oh, that." Webb looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't destroy it. I just turned it off. The electromagnetic pulse should wear off in a few hours." "Well, mostly. You might need to replace some of the more sensitive components, but the basic structure is fine." Corex made a note on his data pad. "And how, exactly, did you know that an emergency beacon could generate sufficient electromagnetic pulse to disable a battle drone?" "Emergency beacons use concentrated energy cells to generate distress signals across multiple electromagnetic frequencies simultaneously. The power requirements are pretty substantial." Webb shrugged. "Basic physics. Overload the containment system and you get a focused EM burst. I mean, it's not rocket science." Several instructors exchanged glances. For humans, rocket science actually was considered basic transportation technology. Cadet Webb, another instructor, interjected, "Your species has been part of the galactic community for less than 3 years. How do you possess knowledge of battle drone vulnerabilities?" "I don't specifically, but electromagnetic shielding follows pretty universal principles. Most military equipment is designed to withstand external EM attacks, not internal disruption of power systems. It's a common engineering oversight." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The human cadet had identified and exploited a fundamental weakness in military technology using nothing more than basic scientific principles and creative problem-solving. "Cadet Webb," Corex said slowly, "are you telling us that humans routinely analyze military equipment for vulnerabilities?" "Well, no, but we do tend to figure out how things work, and once you understand how something works, it's usually pretty obvious how to break it." Webb paused. "Is that not normal?" The answer, as every instructor in the room suddenly realized, was no. Most species approached problems through established procedures and proven methodologies. Humans apparently approached problems by immediately trying to find ways to break them. "One final question," Corex said. "Were you concerned about the possibility of failure?" Webb considered this seriously. "Not really. I mean, worst case scenario, I'd get teleported out before anything permanently damaging happened. And best case, I'd learn something interesting about battle drone engineering." He grinned. Either way seemed like a win. As Webb left the briefing room, the assembled instructors sat in contemplative silence. They had just witnessed something unprecedented, a cadet who approached mortal danger with the same casual interest that most people reserved for trying new breakfast foods. "Sir," the technical analyst said quietly, "should we be concerned that humans view military assessments as learning opportunities?" Admiral Corex's gills fluttered again. "I think," he said slowly, "we should be very concerned indeed." Outside the briefing room, Webb rejoined his fellow cadets, who immediately surrounded him with questions. "How did you know it would work?" demanded Thyron. "What if you had been wrong?" asked Crix. "Were you scared?" burped Blorp. Webb looked around at the assembled aliens, all staring at him with expressions ranging from admiration to horror to complete bewilderment. "Guys," he said with a grin, "it's just problem solving. You identify the issue, figure out the available resources, and apply basic scientific principles. The drone was the problem, the emergency beacon was the resource, and electromagnetic pulse was the solution." "But what if it hadn't worked?" Thyron insisted. Webb shrugged. "Then I would have learned something useful about battle drone shielding, and you all would have gotten to see a really spectacular explosion." The alien cadets stared at him in silence, slowly beginning to understand why human psychology was considered an unsolved mystery by xenobiologists across the galaxy. As they walked toward the cafeteria, none of them noticed the small recording device that had captured every word of their conversation, or the fact that the footage of Webb's assessment was already being transmitted to military intelligence agencies across 17 star systems. The galaxy, it seemed, was about to get a very educational introduction to human problem-solving techniques. And somewhere in a secure facility on Earth, a small group of military analysts were watching their own copy of the footage and trying very hard not to smile. The plan, after all, was proceeding exactly as intended. 3 days later, Admiral Corex found himself staring at a holographic display that made his headache worse with each passing minute. The footage of Webb's assessment had been analyzed by every military intelligence agency in the galaxy, and the results were problematic. 17 different species have requested detailed psychological profiles on human combat doctrine, reported his aide, a nervous Flixian whose tentacles kept twitching with anxiety. The Stellar Imperium is demanding access to human military academies, and the Zephyrian War Council has officially classified humans as a species of extreme tactical concern. Corex's gills fluttered in what could generously be called suppressed panic. All this because one could disable a training drone. "Sir, it's not just what he did, it's how he did it." Our analysts ran probability calculations. The chance of randomly selecting the correct countermeasure from available equipment was approximately 1 in 47,000. So he got lucky. That's what we thought. Until this arrived. The aide activated a new hologram showing a cramped communication booth where a figure in Earth military uniform sat behind a desk marked Terran Defense Force, a recruitment division. "Greetings, Galactic Defense Academy," the human officer began with a smile that somehow managed to be both friendly and terrifying. "I'm Colonel Sarah Martinez, Earth Military Liaison. We've received some interesting inquiries about our training methods." Corex felt his stomach drop into regions of space that probably violated several laws of physics. "We want to assure you that Cadet Webb's performance reflects standard human military education. Basic tactical analysis, creative resource utilization, and adaptive problem-solving are core curriculum at all Terran academies." The colonel's smile widened. "We're quite proud of our graduates." The message continued, but Corex had stopped listening. Standard human military education. The cadet who had casually dismantled their most advanced training equipment represented the baseline for human military competence. "Sir," the aide's tentacles had progressed from twitching to what could best be described as frantic waving. "There's more." "More what?" "More humans, sir. The Academy just received 47 additional applications from Earth. All military academy graduates, all requesting immediate enrollment." Corex stared at the data streaming across his display. Names, service records, test scores that seemed mathematically impossible. These cannot be accurate. No species achieves these performance metrics. We verified them directly with Earth, sir. Twice. Before Corex could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Emergency lighting bathed the command center in harsh red illumination as automated systems announced a Code 7 alert. What now? Corex demanded. Sir, we have an unauthorized entry in Sector 7. Multiple life signs, classification unknown. The main display shifted to show security footage from the Academy's most restricted section. A group of figures in environmental suits moved through corridors that were supposed to be impenetrable, disabling security systems with casual efficiency. How did they breach perimeter defenses? Corex asked. Unknown, sir. Security logs show no record of forced entry. It's as if they simply appeared. One of the figures looked directly at a security camera and waved. The gesture seemed almost friendly, which made it infinitely more disturbing. Admiral, came Webb's voice through the communication system, though he should have been in his dormitory. Sorry to bother you, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. Cadet Webb. Corex's voice cracked slightly. How are you in a restricted sector? Oh, we're not in a restricted sector. We're in what you labeled the impossible-to-access emergency command center. Honestly, the security design has some pretty obvious flaws. Nothing personal. The display split to show Webb standing in the Academy's most classified facility and surrounded by equipment that wasn't supposed to exist according to most species' understanding of physics. We, Corex asked weakly. Right, introductions. Admiral, meet Captain Lisa Park, Sergeant Mike Torres, Lieutenant Amy Foster, and Corporal Jake Williams. My study group from the Thyron Military Academy. 4 additional humans removed their helmets, revealing expressions of polite interest that made Corex's headache evolve into what might charitably be called existential dread. Study group, he managed. We've been analyzing galactic military doctrine for the past few months, Webb explained cheerfully. Fascinating stuff, really, though there are some fundamental tactical assumptions that seem questionable. Captain Park stepped forward, consulting a data pad. Admiral Corex, we've completed a preliminary security assessment of your facility. We've identified 47 critical vulnerabilities, including the rather glaring oversight in your quantum encryption protocols. Quantum encryption is theoretically unbreakable, Corex protested. Sure, if you ignore the possibility of temporal phase shifting, Sergeant Torres interjected. Basic stuff, really. Any first-year physics student could crack it. Corex turned to his aide, whose tentacles had now achieved a state that could only be described as hysterical wiggling. Explain to me how 5 human cadets infiltrated the most secure facility in the galactic sector. Sir, according to our analysis, they didn't infiltrate anything. They simply identified 73 distinct methods of entry that our security systems weren't designed to detect. Lieutenant Foster looked up from a console she'd apparently been casually hacking. Your defense grid operates on some interesting principles, Admiral. Very sophisticated, very impressive. Also completely vulnerable to synchronized electromagnetic disruption applied at 17 specific frequency intervals. You're telling me, Corex said slowly, that humans can simply ignore our security measures? Not ignore, Webb corrected. Understand. Once you understand how something works, bypassing it becomes a matter of basic engineering. Corporal Williams had wandered over to a classified weapons display and was examining a prototype plasma cannon with obvious professional interest. Nice design, but the cooling system has a critical flaw. About 15 seconds of continuous fire, and the whole thing would overheat catastrophically. That weapon is classified above your security clearance level, Corex pointed out weakly. Classification doesn't change physics, Williams replied. Though I have to say whoever designed the magnetic field containment system was pretty clever. Flawed, but clever. Admiral Corex found himself in the unprecedented position of watching 5 human students casually dismantle everything he thought he knew about military security advanced technology, and the fundamental nature of reality. What, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, do you want? Captain Park exchanged glances with her team members. Actually, we just wanted to talk. See, Earth received some interesting communications from various galactic military organizations asking about human combat capabilities. And, Corex prompted, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to hear the answer. Well, they seem to think that Webb here represents some kind of exceptional human specimen. Elite military training, advanced tactical education, that sort of thing. Webb looked genuinely embarrassed. I tried to tell them I was just a regular cadet, but nobody believed me. The problem, Lieutenant Foster continued, is that these inquiries are starting to make Earth's government nervous. When alien civilizations start asking detailed questions about human military capabilities, it tends to raise some red flags. Sergeant Torres nodded grimly, especially when those civilizations have histories of conquering planets they consider tactically interesting. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as the implications became clear. You think, Corex said carefully, that the galaxy views humans as a military threat? We think, Captain Park replied, that the galaxy is about to make a very serious mistake. She activated a holographic display that showed strategic analyses from across 17 different star systems, military assessments, threat evaluations, and worst of all, several documents that looked suspiciously like invasion plans. The Draconian Empire has classified Earth as a priority neutralization target, Park continued. The Stellar Imperium is debating preemptive action, and the Zephyrian War Council has started referring to humans as the existential threat species. Corex stared at the intelligence reports, his understanding of galactic politics shifting like sand dunes in a windstorm. This is all based on one training assessment. Not just the assessment, Webb said quietly. It's the reaction to the assessment. See, humans have been watching galactic military doctrine for 3 years now, and we've noticed some patterns. The holographic display shifted to show tactical analyses that made Corex's head spin. Fleet movements, strategic positioning, resource allocation, all viewed through what appeared to be a completely alien perspective on warfare itself. Most galactic civilizations approach military conflict like chess, Lieutenant Foster explained. Structured, predictable, following established rules and conventions. Humans, Sergeant Torres continued, approach military conflict like, well, imagine chess where all the pieces can suddenly move in directions the board wasn't designed for. Corporal Williams looked up from the plasma cannon he'd been examining. Also, we tend to question why we're playing chess in the first place when we could just flip the table over. The room fell silent as the full implications of human military philosophy became clear. You're saying, Corex managed, that humans don't follow conventional military doctrine? We're saying, Captain Park replied, that humans don't really believe in conventional anything. We see rules as suggestions, limitations as puzzles to solve, and impossible situations as interesting challenges. Webb nodded enthusiastically. It's like the battle drone assessment. Everyone else saw a survival test. I saw an engineering problem with a really obvious solution. But what happens, Corex asked, his voice barely audible, when the galaxy decides that humans are too dangerous to leave alone? The 5 humans exchanged looks that somehow managed to convey volumes of unspoken communication. That, Captain Park said with a smile that made Corex's species' survival instinct start screaming, would be unfortunate. For who? Corex asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. For everyone who isn't human, Webb replied cheerfully. See, the thing about humans is that we're really good at problem solving. And if the galaxy becomes a problem that needs solving... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Lieutenant Foster activated another holographic display, this one showing Earth's current military capabilities. The data made Corex's vision go slightly fuzzy around the edges. These numbers cannot be correct, he whispered. Oh, those are just the public capabilities, Sergeant Torres said casually. The classified stuff is significantly more creative. Captain Park leaned forward, her expression becoming serious for the first time since the conversation began. "Admiral, Earth's government sent us here to deliver a message. A friendly one. Which is: humans are perfectly happy to remain peaceful members of the galactic community. We enjoy cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, and shared exploration of the universe. We have no interest in conquest, domination, or interfering with other species' internal affairs." Corex felt a brief moment of relief, which lasted exactly until Park continued speaking. "However," she said, "if the galaxy decides to treat us as a threat, we will become one. And when humans decide to become a threat," she gestured to the security breaches, the disabled defenses, and the casual analysis of classified military technology. "Well, you've seen what 5 students can accomplish on a weekend." The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. "What do you want from us?" Corex asked. Webb stepped forward, his expression earnest. "Help us prevent a war that nobody actually wants. The galaxy is scared because they think humans are unpredictable. They're not wrong, but they're not right either." "We're not unpredictable," Captain Park continued. "We're just optimized for adaptation. We see patterns differently, approach problems from unexpected angles, and refuse to accept that anything is truly impossible. Which," Lieutenant Foster added, "makes us excellent allies and terrible enemies." Corporal Williams had finished his examination of the plasma cannon and was now looking at what appeared to be a classified star chart. "The thing is, most species seem to think that military superiority comes from having better weapons or stronger defenses. Humans believe," Sergeant Taurus concluded, "that military superiority comes from thinking about problems in ways your opponent never considered." Admiral Corex stared at the 5 humans who had casually demonstrated capabilities that shouldn't exist, infiltrated facilities that couldn't be breached, and analyzed military technology that was supposedly beyond their understanding. "What do you propose?" he asked. "Simple," Webb replied with that same cheerful grin that had started this entire situation. "We help you redesign galactic military training doctrine, show other species how humans actually think, demonstrate that our capabilities come from education and creativity rather than some kind of biological superiority." In exchange, Captain Park added, "Earth remains exactly what it's always been, a peaceful member of the galactic community that just happens to have some interesting ideas about problem solving. And if we refuse?" The 5 humans looked at each other, and for a moment their expressions became completely unreadable. Then Webb said quietly, "You'll get to find out why Earth's government considers 5 military academy students an appropriate diplomatic mission to the most advanced military facility in the galaxy." The threat was delivered so casually, with such friendly sincerity, that it took Corex several seconds to recognize it as a threat at all. "I need to consult with my superiors," he said finally. "Of course," Captain Park replied. "We'll wait here." "Don't worry about security, we've already upgraded your systems. They should be about 30% more efficient now." As Admiral Corex left the command center, his aide scurrying behind him with frantic tentacle movements, he couldn't shake the feeling that the balance of galactic power had just shifted in ways that no one fully understood. Behind him, 5 human students continued their casual examination of military technology that represented the pinnacle of galactic engineering achievement, discussing improvements with the same tone that most people used to debate lunch options. 3 hours later, the Galactic Defense Council received an unprecedented message from Earth, a complete restructuring proposal for military education across 17 star systems, designed to promote mutual understanding and prevent the kind of catastrophic misunderstandings that had historically led to galactic wars. The proposal was accompanied by detailed technical specifications for improvements to every major military system currently in use, along with polite suggestions for upgrading defense networks that had been considered impregnable. The vote to accept Earth's proposal was unanimous. After all, when someone demonstrates that they could dismantle your entire civilization without breaking a sweat, and then offers to teach you how they did it, the smart move is to say yes. In the Academy's cafeteria that evening, Webb sat with his fellow cadets, enjoying a meal that tasted remarkably like chicken, assuming chicken had evolved on a planet with 3 suns and an atmosphere consisting primarily of methane. So Creaks asked, his forked tongue flicking nervously, "What happens now?" Webb shrugged, spearing something that might have been a vegetable with his fork. "Now we go to class, study galactic military history, and try not to accidentally revolutionize interstellar warfare doctrine during our homework assignments." Is that blorp burped uncertainly a normal Tuesday for humans? Webb considered this seriously. Pretty much, yeah. Though usually we try to keep the revolutionary breakthroughs to a minimum during the week. Weekends are better for that sort of thing. As the alien cadets stared at him in a mixture of admiration and terror, Webb couldn't help but smile. The galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place. And somewhere in the depths of space, the various military organizations that had briefly considered humans a threat were beginning to understand a fundamental truth about the universe. There was a significant difference between being afraid of someone and being afraid for them. Humans, it turned out, were the kind of species you wanted on your side when the universe got complicated. Because when humans decided to help solve problems, those problems tended to stay solved. Forever.